There are two ways we could say the name of the territory we're going to be visiting: American Samoa and American Samoa. The Samoa that's American, or an America that's Samoan. And we're going to talk about both, but we're going to start with the latter, American Samoa. And actually more widely, the American Pacific. And before we start to talk islands and territories, it is worth remembering that America, that is to say the contiguous continental states, the lower 48, and Alaska, and Hawaii, are all connected to the Pacific. The mainland of the United States has a Pacific shoreline measuring 1,293 miles. Alaska alone adds a further 6,640 miles of coastline in the North Pacific and into the Bering Sea, longer than the combined coastlines of the entire lower 48 states. And Hawaii contributes another 750 miles of coastline. All in all, the Pacific Coast States of America, not territories, just the states, have 8,683 miles of oceanfront views. That's a lot of miles. That's a lot of Pacific beaches. So it should come as no surprise to anyone that the United States of America is interested in what goes on in the Pacific. Yes, half of Europe claims to have the special relationship with Uncle Joe, but the States has just as many economic and security interests west as it does east. And this certainly fuels the country's ongoing interests in bolstering its position in the region and extending its influence across the world's largest ocean. President Franklin Roosevelt is said to have started each day in the map room of the White House and noted the locations of the Pacific Fleet. From a European perspective, the Pacific might feel far away, otherworldly, but from an American perspective, it ought not. This ocean is close to home. The Pacific Ocean washes up along almost 9,000 miles of the United States. This ocean is home. Today, we're going to take a whistle-stop tour of America's Pacific Islands before focusing on Samoa's American Island. And we'll round out the talk with a quick look ahead at our next port of call, Pago Pago. So, first, when did the US start to explore this vast ocean and take command of some of its scattered islands? And which are the islands that count themselves as American Pacific? As early as 1825, President John Quincy Adams developed a keen interest for expanding the reaches of the US Navy into the Pacific for the purposes of economic development, particularly for commerce and fisheries. Many countries claim island masses in order to spread exclusive economic zones to the water around them. Fishing rights, as anyone from New England's coastal communities can tell you, are highly valuable. And over the centuries, US exploration of the Pacific Ocean has contributed economically, yes, but also militarily. Action in the Pacific theatre ultimately ended World War II. And in the modern era, America and her allies have made incredible strides in communication by sinking submarine cables between various pockets of land claimed by the states. Most of the land owned by the US in the Pacific is uninhabited. More than that, it's fair to say that a fair amount of it is also uninhabitable. In many cases, though certainly not all, no one was relocated for American benefit. There are a few exceptions to that, of course, with perhaps the most well-known being the islanders of Bikini, who were relocated from their island temporarily for nuclear testing purposes, only to later be relocated again and again, never to return home. But most of the islands serve a different purpose and don't have any direct impact on any native communities. America's 9 uninhabited Pacific territories include the Northern Mariana Islands, which are close to the Philippines, Baker Island, just north of the equator, almost halfway from Hawaii to Australia. Howland Island, which is roughly 1,700 nautical miles southwest of Honolulu. Jarvis Island, about halfway between Hawaii and the Cook Islands in the Line Islands archipelago. Johnston Island, a 3,200-acre atoll with nothing but a landing strip and an Air Force base. Johnston Island was unfortunately used as a dumping ground for radioactive waste in the 60s, so visits here are very carefully controlled. Kingman Reef, an uninhabited triangle-shaped atoll roughly halfway between Hawaii and American Samoa. Midway Atoll, close to Hawaii and home to just 40 or so temporary residents. The haunted island of Palmyra, thought to be haunted by Mac and Muff Graham of San Diego, who were murdered there. No one lives on these islands anymore, and it's managed by the US Fish and Wildlife Service. And Wake Island, 600 miles northwest of the Marshall Islands in Micronesia, was seized from Japan in 1945 and continues to be administered by the US military to this day, about 100 temporary residents. But America has islands where people still live, too. Guam, one of the 2 US territories that uses the metric system, the other being Puerto Rico. Saipan, also known as the Northern Mariana Islands. And American Samoa. So what is a territory? And why aren't they states? Well, in many cases, these islands are territories because there's no one there. It's just a conveniently positioned little bit of land poking up from the Pacific. Useful for the military, helpful for claiming fishing territories, but highly unlikely to ever return 2 senators to the Senate, unless Congress starts allowing representation by sea turtles. But in the case of inhabited territories, there are many factors that distinguish territory from statehood. In some cases, one leads on to another, just as it did for Alaska and Hawaii in 1959. An inhabited territory, as opposed to a state, has no vote in US presidential elections and is only able to return a non-voting congressman to the House of Representatives. They can contribute to debates, but they have no vote. There are also limits as to how much or which parts of the US Constitution applies to an inhabited territory, which can work to balance the different cultural traditions of mainland America and societies on America's island territories. All in all, there are 4 types of territory based on 2 measures: organized or unorganized, and incorporated or unincorporated. So, an organized territory has been given, in legal terms through an act of Congress, the right to organize its own political affairs. By most measures, it has home rule or self-governance. Unorganized territories don't have this, generally because no one lives there. Now, the difference between incorporated and unincorporated territories comes down to the US Constitution. If the US Constitution is applied in full, then the territory is considered incorporated. But if there are any omissions or exceptions from the full Constitution, for example, automatic right of citizenship, then the territory is deemed unincorporated. So, American Samoa is what sort of territory? Okay. Actually, here's where things get a bit messy. American Samoa looks like an organized, unincorporated territory. They have their own government and political process, but aren't subject to the American Constitution. Citizens at birth are assigned US nationals, not US citizens. But actually, American Samoa, which has been a territory since 1900 following the Second Samoan Civil War, is an unorganized, unincorporated territory because of a technicality by which Congress has never ratified the latest treaty of political process on the islands. It's an unorganized, unincorporated territory that looks and acts like an organized, unincorporated territory. And that's enough about that. Let's talk about what American life looks like here. From 1900 to 1951, American Samoa was administered by the Navy. The 1950s saw administration of the islands handed over to the Department of the Interior, who have provided administrative leadership ever since. But it wasn't really until 1961 that Americanization really started to make an impact here, outside of military fields. It was in 1961 when JFK appointed Governor H. Rex Lee to lead a huge injection of federal funds and transform American Samoa to American standards. Artificial standards in this region, which has resulted in American Samoa standing out like a sore thumb when held against its neighbors in the region. Governor Lee's public works projects included the construction of roads, schools, housing, port facilities, electricity, a new hospital, a tuna cannery, we'll come back to that, a modern hotel, and a brand new international airport. It was as if the money couldn't ever stop flowing into American Samoa. This small, remote collection of 7 islands was getting the full Washington makeover. And one of the most influential things that Governor Lee, a religious man, introduced was educational television. TV, when introduced in American Samoa, was used to reach the adults and children of the islands and teach them things. It was enriching. It was going to be life-changing. And it was. The only issue, from Governor Lee's perspective, was that by the mid-70s, American Samoan TV looked just like the rest of America. And I think it's fair to say, educational wasn't its dominant feature. But it was this US cultural content beamed into homes across the islands that converted Samoans into American Samoans. In fact, it took 4 attempts on the US government's part to introduce home rule in Samoa, because the locals were so concerned that it would lead to a reduction in the amount of good greenback making its way into the territory. A territory which has become the poster child for an American welfare state. And fast food. There are more fast food restaurants here per person than anywhere else in the Pacific. Now, I mentioned that one of the infrastructure projects funded by Governor Lee was a tuna cannery. And actually, I've mentioned fishing quite a bit so far. So here's the story about that, and then we'll move on to the Samoan side of American Samoa. Just as in Hawaii, where plantation owners pressured the federal government to annex the islands of Hawaii so that they could get around paying import duties on their sugar and pineapples, here in American Samoa, fishermen were looking for a way to get their fish from Asia onto American tables without incurring tariffs. And they came up with a canny solution. Canny. It was a cannery. America Samoa's primary industry is tuna processing and canning. Canned fish of various sorts accounts for more than 95% of the territory's exports. And canneries thrive here because they enable Asian fishing companies to avoid high US tariffs on processed fish with the following loophole. Anything that has 30% value added in the US territory of American Samoa enjoys visa and quota-free entry to the United States. A perfect loophole that has paid dividends royally for the past 70 years. So that's a snapshot of the American story. But what about the Samoa part? Well, American Samoa came to existing separately from Western Samoa, now just Samoa, following the Second Samoan Civil War. The region was carved up between various colonial powers, with Germany taking control of Western Samoa, America taking Eastern Samoa, and Britain cementing her interests in nearby Tonga. But even though they are now completely distinct political entities, Samoans and American Samoans are still very much connected culturally, genetically, and linguistically. American Samoa is a collection of 7 islands, the largest of which, Tutuila, is where we'll be docking in Pago Pago Harbour. The other islands are Aonu'u, Tau, Ofu, Olesega, and 2 atolls, Rose and Swains. And I've spoken so much about America that you might be preparing yourself for American quality in the tropics. Please forget that image, and now prepare yourself for island quality at American prices. There's an important word in Samoan, ainga. It means family, and it's really important here. This is still a communal society, and family is important. In fact, in far Samoa, the Samoan way of life, nothing comes higher than family. And it's probably in this way that American Samoa has best conserved its Samoanness. A traditional village is made up of a few extended families known as Ainga Potopoto. Each assigned land and a chiefly title, each Ainga is headed up by a matai, a person selected based on their loyalty and service to the family. And the matai's responsibility is for the welfare and well-being of each member of their Ainga. The larger the Ainga, the more influence they exercise in village affairs. And the younger members of the Ainga have the utmost respect for their elders. But it's the land ownership and traditional style of making community decisions that keep American Samoans from wanting to become Samoan Americans. You can't own land in American Samoa unless you're at least half Samoan. And even then, not in the way that we would be used to. By remaining an unincorporated territory, American Samoa protects its traditional Ainga-led system of inherited familial land without the sudden inrush of mainland Americans looking for a bargain buy in the tropics, as happened in Hawaii a few decades back. Locals take great pride in family land, land that has been taken care of by many generations of the Ainga. And perhaps this is something we could all learn from. Inheritance of the land isn't based on birth order. The firstborn doesn't have automatic right to the parent's property. Land is passed down from generation to generation by way of the best behaved and most obedient children. Descendants who embody the traditions and values of Samoa and are therefore most likely to continue protecting this way of life into the future. I love that. Even though as the firstborn, it would definitely keep me on my toes a bit more. Maybe spending 8 months a year thousands of miles away from my darling parents would be a less sensible decision if I had my hopes set on any inheritance. Life here, away from the McDonald's and other material Americanisms, is still rooted in tradition. A tradition that, by some accounts, stretches back some 3,000 years. So let's take a quick look at Pago Pago before we round up. Pago Pago is the port gateway to the magnificent islands of American Samoa, and one of the few places you can enter America without the need for an American visa. The town is within walking distance of the port, though it's not ideally set up for cruise visitors, as the port's primary purpose is as a commercial fishing and cannery port. But there are a few shops and local vendors selling goods along the harbour as you walk into town. If you're looking for a beach day, the famous $2 beach, or indeed any of the large beaches, are a great fun day on the sand, in the sea, and local buses are pretty reasonable at around $2. And you'll notice that a lot of the buses are called Ainga buses, and now you'll know that they're a family business. For the closest beach, turn left out of the port and walk about 10 minutes. It's a small beach, but it's popular with the local families and bats. In town, there's a tourist market to the right of the port, and just keep an eye out for the striped awnings. And there's a great place here for really nice, locally crafted wooden pieces, jewellery, trinkets, souvenirs, fresh fruit. Definitely barter. And remember, this is island quality at American prices. Your job is to get that price down to island prices. Sometimes there are dancers or musicians playing outside the market as well to showcase local culture for visitors. Also in town, a couple of museums to note are the Marine Science Centre, also known as the Tauesi P.F. Sunia Ocean Centre, and the Jean P. Hayden Museum in the not too far Fongatongo village, which exhibits local historic artifacts in the former US naval facility there. But perhaps the most memorable thing to explore here are the McDonald's. Not really. I mean the National Park of American Samoa, which is free to visit and has a great visitor centre with Wi-Fi. The park features ancient paleotropical rainforests that are home to rare species of animals like the flying megabat, which has a terrifying wingspan of over 3 feet. That's a big bat. The national park also features hundreds of miles of untouched coastline, which is home to over 150 species of Indo-Pacific coral. It's also, fun fact, the only US national park in the Southern Hemisphere. And that's because American Samoa is the only US territory in the Southern Hemisphere. I'm looking forward to taking your questions in our Q&A session about Pago Pago, but for now, I want to end with this. At the beginning of the talk, I said there are 2 ways to look at this place we're visiting: American or Samoan. And that could have been the case. America could have bulldozed its way through Samoa, creating a mini LA or New York in the South Pacific. But it didn't. Sure, we'll definitely see American influences in Pago Pago that wouldn't be apparent in Samoa. But American Samoa, the Eastern Isles of Samoa, never lost their roots. These 7 islands are a fascinating example of geopolitical negotiation in action. Everyone benefits in some way. The better priced fish is American. The jobs at the fisheries and canneries are Samoan. Protection of national interests in the Indo-Pacific is American. Protection of traditional society and values is Samoan. So it's really not American or Samoa. It's American and Samoa. It's American Samoa. And I hope you have a great time there.